For the last 60 years or so, we've seen literally trillions of dollars move from rich countries to poorer ones. And the goal was always really simple: end poverty. But in a lot of places, something strange happened. The money came pouring in, but the growth just never showed up. So how can a country get billions of dollars and somehow stay poor? To figure that out, we've got to understand the big promise that all this money was built on in the first place.
I mean, just to get a sense of the scale of this whole experiment, look at Africa. Over the last 50 years, more than $1.2 trillion in aid has been poured into the continent. That's more than the entire economy of a country like Spain or Australia. A staggering amount of money.
So you'd expect, right? A total transformation. But instead, we're left with this really confusing question. With all that cash, all that investment, why did poverty in so many parts of the continent not just stick around, but actually get worse?
To solve this puzzle, we have to rewind the clock a bit, back to a time when pumping huge amounts of money into a problem seemed like a magic bullet. The idea that you could just inject cash into a broken economy and, fix it, that wasn't just a theory. It had been done before, and it worked spectacularly.
See, after World War II, Europe was in ruins. So the United States launched what was called the Marshall Plan, pouring the equivalent of about $160 billion today into the region. And the result? It was just astonishing. Within a decade, Europe's economy wasn't just back on its feet, it was absolutely booming.
So the Marshall Plan created this incredibly powerful, almost seductive formula. It looked like you could just take any struggling place, add a ton of capital, and boom, you get economic growth. The world really thought it had found the answer to poverty.
And so, what do you do when you think you have a miracle cure? You apply it on a global scale. Africa became the main focus. Governments, charities, huge international organizations, they all got behind the exact same idea. Send money and you'll speed up progress.
But the results were, well, they were staggering, and not in a good way. When this whole thing started back in the 1960s, about 11% of Africa's population lived in poverty. By the 1990s, after decades of aid, that number had exploded to 66%. Today, it's down around 38%, which is still more than 3 times higher than when all that aid money started flowing.
And this right here is the heart of the paradox. Aid to the continent shot up by almost 120 times, yet average income for many Africans actually went down. More money was directly connected to worse outcomes. Something was fundamentally broken with that simple formula.
This led a growing chorus of economists to a really shocking conclusion, one that's captured perfectly in this quote. The issue wasn't just that the aid was being wasted. No, the problem was that the aid itself seemed to be actively making things worse.
So how on earth could that happen? Well, the answer isn't really about the money. It's about the system the money was poured into. Think about it like this. If you pour water into a bucket that's full of holes, it doesn't matter how much water you add, right? It's never going to fill up. The money was the water. The holes were the weak systems on the ground.
And that brings us to maybe the single most important concept in this entire story: institutions. Now, we're not talking about buildings here. We're talking about the rules of the game, things like a functioning legal system, property rights, an accountable government, all the stuff that creates a stable environment where growth can actually happen.
Okay, so problem number one is what's called the dependency trap. In a healthy country, the government taxes its people, and in return, it provides services. It's a social contract. But when a government starts getting most of its money from foreign aid, it doesn't really need its citizens anymore. It starts answering to the donors. And when that happens, accountability just vanishes, and corruption can run wild, costing an estimated $30 billion every single year. The danger here is huge. It's actually a lot like the 2008 financial crisis. You had Wall Street bundling these toxic, worthless mortgages into packages they stamped with a AAA safe rating. Well, foreign aid flowing into countries with weak institutions is kind of the same thing. It looks good on the outside, but it's a disaster waiting to happen because the underlying system is totally broken.
But it gets even worse. It's not just about enabling corruption. Large floods of aid money can actually start to dismantle a country's economy from the inside out. This creates a whole other problem known as market distortion.
So here's how it works. When billions in foreign currency flood a country,
the value of the local currency shoots way up. Now that sounds like a good thing, but it makes that country's exports, the stuff it sells to the rest of the world, suddenly way more expensive. So other countries stop buying, and the local industries that need to export to survive, like manufacturing, they just collapse.
And look, this isn't just a theory. You can see the real-world damage right here. Instead of industrializing like Europe and Asia did, Africa has actually de-industrialized. Its industrial sector has shrunk from 15% of the economy down to just 10% in the last couple of decades. It's wiping out the exact kind of jobs that are supposed to be a ladder out of poverty.
So here's the thing. This whole story, it's not really just about Africa, and it's not even just about foreign aid. It's got a universal truth, a truth about what actually creates prosperity anywhere in the world, and it always comes down to the internal systems.
Just take a look at this comparison. After the war, Europe had working institutions. It just needed cash. Much of post-colonial Africa had the opposite problem. It got the cash, but it had weak institutions. And you can even see a version of this today in wealthy countries. Look at the UK. It's dealing with stagnant wages and a brain drain, not because it lacks money, but because of decades of underinvestment in its own core systems, like housing and healthcare.
And that brings us to the single most important takeaway from all of this. No amount of money from the outside can ever be a substitute for strong, accountable, and functioning internal systems. Because at the end of the day, money doesn't build nations, institutions do.
Which of course leaves us with one final and really essential question. For decades, the entire world was convinced that money was the answer to poverty. So, if we now know that it isn't, we have to ask ourselves,